So, as we have been seeing that book 1, canto 1, almost in one short canto. It's not a short canto, but okay, average size canto. Sri Aurobindo summarizes the whole thing. In a way, he lets out the entire secret, the problem, the difficulty. And this is the work of the master artist. Only he could do that. And in a way, it is the same story which is repeated again and again upon earth, that the divine comes, he touches matter, he wants a heavenly bloom, the flowers of paradise to be planted on earthly soil. Earth is not ready, it rejects it. The divine withdraws, and then it must get ready over a period of time till again, once again, in the great cycle of time, the divine comes, touches. This is the drama which is going on. And Savitri is one of the earlier protagonists of this great play, an incarnation of the Divine Mother. The way the divine understands our difficulty is so beautifully mentioned here. And yet his presence, his coming, is itself a proof and a sign that even if for a few moments earth and this matter could hold the divine presence, it is a sign, a proof that one day this matter will be transformed enough, plastic enough, conscious enough to completely hold the divine presence. And that is the second coming, the divine kingdom established upon earth. Only when matter is transformed, divine kingdom can be established upon earth. So here Sri Aurobindo is already told us that the coming of the divine is the prescience of a marvelous birth to come. Only a little the godlight can stay. Spiritual beauty illumining human sight, lines with its passion and mystery, matter's mask, and squanders eternity on a beat of time. Our eyes are not accustomed. That is the problem. It's not that man has a problem, it's man is the problem. Because we are so limited, our material casement is so limited, so imperfect, it cannot hold that. We cannot see, we cannot hear. In fact, our seeing is a blindness. And sometimes difficult to say which fate is better, to see the way we see or not to see. That is the limitation. And therefore the godlight cannot stay for long. As when a soul draws near the sill of birth, adjoining mortal time to timelessness, a spark of deity lost in matter's script, its luster vanishes in the inconscient planes. That transitory glow of magic fire, so now dissolved in bright accustomed air, the message ceased and waned the messenger. There is a kind of parallel process which goes on. Just as the divine descends, touches earth, so something of the delegate or an ansha or a part and parcel of the divine descends into matter. And it's very strange. As soon as it enters into the mortal plane, it loses its memory, it loses its awareness, it becomes forgetful of itself. It's the effect of this atmosphere which is so dull and heavy. We think that, when we read about the psychic being and such beautiful things, and Mother has said like this, and Sri Aurobindo has said like this, and these thoughts come sometimes till the definitive experience comes, that how is it we don't know all this? That's the very nature, this dull, heavy atmosphere. The moment that light descends, it's lost in matter script. The Mother speaks even about the supramental descent, how it descended. And immediately inconscient rose in great waves of darkness to swallow it. Of course, it cannot swallow it. It will tear from its belly and come out. But that is the event which takes place always. Earth cannot hold, the vase breaks, it's too fragile. How the Mother, in her what we call humanly as the last days, was constantly hammering matter, making it ready to hold that light, to hold that power, to hold that flame to its utmost. That is the kind of labor. It was very easy to escape from that. Great saints have done that. But she won't do that, because that is the work. It can only be done when you are in matter. And the psychic being descends again and again, and the moment it enters, it loses. Elsewhere, Sri Aurobindo describes this very beautifully when Narada enters. In fact, in the ancient Indian tradition, this whole sphere is called as Martilok, the sphere of mortality. Its atmosphere is such that the moment you enter, even gods begin to weep. So when Narada enters this atmosphere, what does he say? Sri Aurobindo says, he did not sing anymore of the immortal ecstasy, but he began to sing of death and pain, of ignorance and fate. Narada is the divine man who lives in the immortal glory. The Lord is his companion. And yet, what is the effect? The moment he enters into the earth's atmosphere, and Sri Aurobindo has a very similar description. Here he speaks about the sill of birth, where mortal time joins timelessness. Very similar description. It's a reality that as it borders on into this mortal sphere, it begins to feel the touch of pain. It's in the very nature of things. How important atmosphere is. In fact, in one of her early talks, he even talks about the atmosphere of places. He speaks about the atmosphere of Paris and says that everywhere it's built of desire. And no wonder in one of her prayers he says, how much more difficult it is for those who dwell in the cities. She knew even those difficulties which we don't know, to turn towards thee, because it's so much, the whole atmosphere is full of commerce, desire. You enter, it's a common experience. We all feel very nice as long as we are within this safe sanctuary. Right across, we walk into Nehru Street. Of course, here we are still safe. We can go without looking left and right. But we all have the experience. Going to shopping malls have come. There is another likely to come in place of the distillery. And it's very difficult to say which was a better choice. The distillery made people unconscious physically. The shopping mall will make people unconscious psychologically. So it's an evolution of unconsciousness or an evolution of consciousness, we don't know. For the moment it is fine, the distillery is closed. But the point is that it's the atmosphere. The moment we enter, we forget. It's not that we become someone else, we forget that. And that's why it's called, one of the words used in Upanishads for awakening is to get back the smriti. Very significant word. You remember who you are. That's awakening. It's like, oh, you are that. And several places Sri Aurobindo uses this word. And memory climbed back. It's something very significant. And this atmosphere sullies us. And then we understand the very profound meaning of a simple sentence that the mother utters, very passingly. She says, after Supermind has descended after a few years, she says, she sees a being like a child sprinkling some supramental substance upon the earth. And those were the days when solar flares were being observed by the scientist. And when she was told about it, she says, I'm not sure whether it is because of that or because of this event. And then she says something very interesting. She says the very atmosphere of the earth has changed. She knew the problem. She knew it's no point telling good philosophies. We all know that. But unless the very atmosphere changes, it will be the same story again and again. So she has brought down something which will ensure that over a period of time, the very atmosphere changes more and more. And it's something which one can feel it, and all of us have felt it, that 30, 40 years back, or maybe 30 years back, the kind of atmosphere we breathed in this world and the kind of atmosphere we breathe now, there is something different, and today's children know it. They suddenly feel very carefree, they feel full of joy inside. They don't know how to express it. They end up doing stupid things, that's a different matter. But the heaviness, the denseness, the burden, the care, the anxiety which weighed upon man. And then we also understand the great sacrifice of Sri Aurobindo. We know the Second World War and how much bitterness and poison and hatred would have been thrown out. Infernal darkness was thrown out of the human consciousness. And we wonder, normally the effect of such a darkness would have lasted, who knows, for centuries. And we wonder how within nearly a decade, what happened to all that? What absorbed it? And that was the pain of earth, the poison of earth, the kalkut which comes out when you churn the great ocean of life, that he was swallowing, so that this atmosphere can be made clear. So, in a sense, Sri Aurobindo tells us the real problem, that the moment you enter into this atmosphere, its luster vanishes in the inconscient planes. That's why we don't see the soul. Scientists ask, why can't we see the soul? You say there is soul, we can't see it. Here is the answer so beautifully, that sir, we see it through the screen of inconscience, and that is too dark to show us any light. Take off your glasses and you will see it. As simple as that, and as difficult as that, because the very earth nature is in the grip of that. That transitory glow of magic fire, so now dissolved in bright accustomed air, the message ceased and vain the messenger, the single call, the uncompanioned power, drew back into some far-off secret world. The hue and marvel of the supernal beam, she looked no more on our mortality. Later on, Sri Aurobindo will speak about this problem of God light coming, touching earth and going back, and how humanity turns it into a dogma, a religion, and a church, and a theology, all kinds of things. Even in, very soon he will speak about it, and several places speaks. In one of his letters he says that how this is a serious work and cannot be done by any propaganda. In fact, he says it should not be done like that. And he says that every time the light has come, it has withdrawn, because man has turned it into a pompous farce, from which the light has receded into the secrecy of its silence. This way he is describing, and what is left is a sacred name, a sacred yearning somewhere, the worship, and many other things. She looked no more on our mortality. The excess of beauty natural to God kind could not uphold its claim on time-born eyes. Too mystic real for space tenancy, her body of glory was expunged from heaven. The rarity and wonder lived no more. Of course, we see that how now he brings the two together. The entire process of awakening, the avatar coming and lighting up everything, touching, withdrawing, and now he links it to Usha, the physical dawn, how she comes, illumines our sight, that beam fills up with hope and joy, and then it withdraws somewhere into some far off secret world. And what we see, it dissolves in the bright accustomed air, and there was the common light of earthly day. Now we have there was the common light of earthly day. So this is the way always it works. Sri Krishna comes and withdraws. He breaks the tribes and establishes a nation. But what we see when he withdraws is a utter bloodshed, so much so that his own tribe destroys itself. That is the last work he does. It is said that when Sri Krishna, when the war is over, all the celestial beings come and say, Lord, your work is over, why don't you come back? He says, no, I have two more things to do. He says, what is there? You have done now, Pandavas have won, Yudhishthira is the king. He says, no, there are two more difficult problems I have to solve. What is it? So he says, I have to drown Dwarka into the ocean. Why? It's too opulent. It is made of jewels which belong to heaven. Earth is not ready for it. The day I go, they will loot it. I must drown it into the sea. What else you would do? He says, I have to destroy my own clan. These fellows, they are going to create problems. So he accomplishes these two tasks. So one would wonder, what did he do? And Sri Aurobindo lets out this secret in a Bengali essay on the Gita, Gitar Bhumika. He says the work of Krishna at one level, there were several kinds of works he did, which he has spoken elsewhere, was to establish a nation unit by destroying the tribes. Before that, they were tribes. And that's why Arjuna's big concern is tribes are there. And my tribe will be spoiled. He's worried about his tribe. And Shri Krishna doesn't tell him openly. He says, don't worry about that. He has come to destroy that. Because a new thing can come, the nation unit. And that was the birth of a nation which carried on for almost 2000 years, preserved by many kings through many turmoils, difficulties. Now, Sri Aurobindo says, maybe if today Krishna was to come, he may put his weight onto some other side. He may like to establish the world state. And we see already that sign taking place. The nation units and the world units are beginning to merge. On one side there are nations, on the other side there are already people who have become netizens, who are wanting to form global units. How the divine works, he withdraws and a whole work is done by time. Time accomplishes what he has foreseen. Much later in Savitri he would say, this was a seed cast in endless time. A light is shown, a seed is shown. The ages toil to express. What he has given to earth, now the ages will toil to express because he has fixed it. That is the fate of earth. So when he says there was the common light of earthly day, it's not actually a sorrowful event. It's like he has done everything and now there will be the labor and the sense of effort and the pang. Man has to work it out. It has to be worked out through man rather. Affranchised from the respite of fatigue. Our respite is When we are tired, so nice. If we are energetic, after some time we feel something is abnormal. We must feel tired and sleepy. Respite of fatigue. Once more the humor of the speed of life pursued the cycles of her blinded quest. All sprang to their unvarying daily acts. The thousand peoples of the soil and tree obeyed the unforeseen instant's urge, and leader here with his uncertain mind, alone who stares at the future's covered face, man lifted up the burden of his fate. Again, such a beautiful description of our humanity. Animals have no problems. Animals don't stare at fate. Take a goat for sacrifice and give her something to eat, and the goat will munch very happily. It doesn't know that it's going to be sacrificed, and this fellow is carrying me very nicely on the shoulders. He is going to, very soon I am going to be dead. It will look here, there, call, no problem. With man, even if nothing is being done, he is not being taken for any sacrifice, yet he will think, tomorrow I may become the sacrificial goat. Even if everything is around, he suffers. Why? Because he is endowed with a very problematic thing. Mind which seeks but knows not. That is the big problem. Our life is a questioning ignorance. That is how Sri Aurobindo describes. But the problem is we try to make it an answering ignorance, and that's a big problem. As long as it's a questioning ignorance, is fine. I question, but I don't know the answer, and I must assent to get the answer. As long as we get the answers, this is a very big game. And Sri Aurobindo talks about it in one of his letters when Dilip Kumar Roy asked him that, Sir, he quotes Anatole France, who says that if there is God, who is supposed to be omnipotent and omniscient, why there is suffering and evil on this earth? And he says, either God would remove suffering but could not, in which case he is impotent. Either he could remove suffering but would not, in which case he is perverse. And if he both could and would, why doesn't he do it? So Sri Aurobindo says, you know, Dilip, you don't know the other side of the story. God met him in some heaven of irony. And there God asked him, yes, Anatole, how's your world doing? I believe, you know, I am always of a little retiring predisposition. So when science and industry came and said, I will set the world right, I said, all right, so much less work for me. So I went behind the scene. And I allowed it to prosper. But what is it? The reports that I hear, there is still so much unhappiness. Is it that science and industry could remove suffering but would not? Is it that they would remove suffering but could not? And if they could and would, why don't they do it? So the problem is man, but that was necessary because man's mind has to be stressed to its limit. We have to try all our ignorant means. And that's why it's a big grace if all the means of ignorance are thrown away from us. It's a real grace if everything we clutch at for support is smashed in one go. Our heart clutches for emotional support onto people. Our mind clutches for knowledge onto information overload, all kinds of things. Our life clutches onto, well, lawyers, policemen, doctors, engineers, who all, for little power, little strength. And if these supports are taken away from us, we think it's misfortune. And what Sri Aurobindo says, O misfortune, blessed be thou, for through thou I have seen the face of my beloved. The mother speaks about it that when you come to yoga, you must be ready to let go of every scaffolding and hang by nothing but faith, the slender thread of faith. It's called in other religions as the leap of faith. Till man makes this leap of faith, we have to learn that, okay, we are ignorant, our mind cannot answer it. Let's make a leap of faith. The divine will take care in his own way. We can't do that. We turn to props. And so one after another, those props go. At some point they go. And it's a big race sometimes with rare beings. The props are snatched away forcibly. It's the love of Mahakali and we welcome her not. We read those lines in the issue where Sri Aurobindo says, an hour comes when fail all nature's means, cast out from their protecting ignorance, that he at length must cast from him his surface soul and be the ungarbed entity within. We never give ourselves that chance. We trust this manager very much. And we just refuse to believe that there is a better fellow inside who can take care of things better. And it's not only true individually, it's true collectively. And it's amazing how this ignorance grips human mind, that we still believe that no, divine, it's very nice, but divine doesn't know practical things. It's amazing. There is a very interesting vision of the mother about the collective yoga. And she sees a big hotel where everything is being broken and rebuilt and broken and rebuilt. And the mother and the daughter, they come out of the room and they can't find the room. So they both go, they suddenly see a desk where a manager is sitting with all the keys and he says, oh, you're looking for your room? I have the keys, I will take you. They said, okay, take us. So he takes them. He tries to find but cannot find the room. He tries several times but cannot find the room. Then the mother and the daughter have a discussion as to what should be the way. And then the mother says, I had an exact vision of the real problem. What is the problem? She says, the daughter is the new creation and the mother is Mother Nature. So far she has done like this, break and build, break and build. New creation doesn't want that things should be plunged into a catastrophe and rebuilt. It wants that we can build up from there. She has a plan in mind. And in that process they come out and lose the way. Who is this manager? She says he's the mind. He thinks he has all the keys and he can open all the doors. But he has no access. And then she says, so long as we trust this, more than we trust this, we'll have problems. And then she says something very cryptically and very sweetly, I hope to see a better place than the big hotel of my last night, where there was so much confusion and chaos. And all this confusion and chaos because and leader here with his uncertain mind. And we trust it so much, though he has said, we know not even the step in front. It cannot tell us with all its wisdom and knowledge and information explosion at its disposal. We cannot say what's going to happen the next moment. This is the state of ignorance in which we live. And leader here with his uncertain mind, alone who stares at the future's covered face, man lifted up the burden of his fate. This is the burden we carry. Literally on our head. With the mind's advent, we carry a burden. Animal doesn't carry a burden. It doesn't stare at the future. It lives in the moment. And that's why sometimes this too much of philosophy of live in the present can be very dangerous. We can follow it only if we say live in the eternal present. Otherwise, animals also live in the present. They do what they feel at that point of time. They don't think of the future, they don't think of the past. They obey. What a beautiful, the unwearying daily acts, the unforeseen instant's urge. That's living in the narrow and limited present. We should live in the eternal present. Then only we can get out of that. This is the burden of man, that he is ignorant. But the best part is the very next line and the next movement is juxtaposed. That is the beauty of Sri Aurobindo, how he brings two such things together and makes them whole, which seem to be so different. Man lifting up the burden of his fate, and the very next line, there is a gap in the next passage, and Savitri too awoke among these tribes. Immediately there is hope. Man lifts the burden of his fate, but he is not alone. Unknown to man, unseen by man, wearing a mortal cloak, hiding behind the cloak of ignorance and death and pain, walks by our side the Divine Mother, lifting our burden for us. And Savitri too awoke among these tribes. She has identified herself with these tribes. Who are these tribes? All of us who are lifting the burden of our fate. She is also waking up among these tribes. But there is a difference. What is the difference that now he is introducing from that great depth and wideness of the world mother, who is working upon this earth, kindling the fire in the atom and the stars, weaving the patterns and the blooms. She now embodies herself as Savitri, takes a human form. Yet there is a difference. Awoke among these tribes that hasten to join the brilliant summoner's chant. The brilliant summoner is the Usha. She calls, come, come, come. What is she? Where is Usha calling us? To ascend to the sun, to the joy of life. But what man does? And lured by the beauty of the apparent ways, acclaimed their portion of ephemeral joy. What man does, instead of taking the full message, ascend to the light. I am lavishing light and joy and beauty on this earth. But man wakes up and says, oh my God, I have this enemy to tackle. I have this horrible boss, so today I must give him back. Maybe my share prices will go up. And if they go down, it's going to be a terrible disaster. Lured by the beauty of the apparent ways, we don't hear the message. Acclaimed their portion of ephemeral joy. Can I get a little joy out of life? She comes to lift us to the sun. But there is the difference. Savitri is not like us. She is different, though she looks mortal, akin to the eternity when she came. No part she took in this small happiness. A mighty stranger in the human field, the embodied guest within made no response. The call that wakes the leap of human mind, its checkered, eager motion of pursuit, its fluttering hued illusion of desire, visited her heart like a sweet alien note. When someone asked the mother about a couple of her paintings, that mother, they may be lost, shouldn't we get them back? Mother showed no special interest. When pressed too far, she says, my child, we live in eternity. If we make a little caricature also, we want it to be appreciated. We are looking for people who could do some praise and publish something for us. And here is she, my child, we live in eternity. We see the same thing in Sri Aurobindo's life so much, and yet how they experience desire like a sweet and alien note, like the song of the sirens in the battle of in Homer's poem. We find when Odysseus is coming back from the great war, he hears the song of the sirens, and he meets the daughter of Circe, who give him wine which turn you into a swine. So that is the illusion of desire. It looks very nice. It's like a jack in the box wrapped in a very beautiful cover. Oh, I want this gift, I want this gift. Take it. Oh, such a lovely gift. God, you are so kind and merciful. We open it and we get a punch. I say, God, you are such a cheat. You are so terrible. You are so ugly, so cruel. God will tell us, so many times I have been coming and telling you, don't get carried away by appearances. Since you won't listen, I decided to tear off this gift and show it to you, what it contains. And that is why it is said there are only two things which give us unhappiness. One, a desire unfulfilled, and second, a desire fulfilled. Not to get what we want and to get what we want. And this is what humanity follows. But what we follow? The call that wakes the leap of human mind. Our mind does not leap towards the eternal. If today we hear that, oh, so and so great singer or somebody, like that, we don't know the names, but okay, XYZ is coming, or there is this is a good example. There is a discount sale, 30%, 40%. We will rush. Wow. But in her, the embodied guest made no response. The call that wakes the leap of human mind, its checkered, eager motion of pursuit, its fluttering hued illusion of desire, visited her heart like a sweet alien note. Time's message of brief light was not for her. In her, there was the anguish of the gods. The gods are not very quiet people. They are not very saintly people. They can be full of fire and storm. Sri Aurobindo speaks about it in his essay, The Superman. He says, gods too can be violent, but they may move like a storm, but they are covered, veiled by the light. They can be very forceful and mighty and strong in their action. They're not like, okay, quiet, let me say it, it's okay. Here is the anguish of the gods. What is that anguish of the gods? When the Atriya Upanishad, there is a story that when different forms are created, Brahma calls all the gods and tells them, I want you to go into a form and work. So all the gods see different forms and reject. Now it's different matter whether they did a wise thing or not, but we suppose they did a wise thing. They reject all the lower forms. When man is created, they say, yes, there we can go. They jump into the form. God knows where they are lost. Searching their way out. But they create in us an anguish. What is this anguish? It's not the anguish for an unfulfilled desire. It's not the anguish for this or that want not satisfied. What is the anguish of the gods? Oh, if that perfection, that light, that truth, Satyam, Vritam, Vrahatam, that could be established here. Why there cannot be peace? Look at the monks in Burma experiencing the anguish of the gods. Look at the Indians, not expatriate, but the Malay Indians. Look at the Tibetan exiles experiencing the anguish of the gods. Why can't this earth be a perfect place? It's strange how this anguish of the gods, the movement of peace, we want peace. One can understand ordinary humanity. Monks discard this world as an illusion. They could have taken a stance that it's okay, it's on an illusion, this is anityam, this is asukham, and we have to just go on meditating. What she has done, awaken in the heart the anguish of the gods, because that is the fire she brings to earth. It's a holy anguish. We'll read these last 4-5 lines and stop for today. And Savitri too awoke among these tribes that hastened to join the brilliant summoner's chant, and, lured by the beauty of the apparent ways, acclaimed their portion of ephemeral joy, akin to the eternity whence she came. No part she took in this small happiness, a mighty stranger in the human field. The embodied guest within made no response. The call that wakes the leap of human mind, its checkered, eager motion of pursuit, its fluttering hued illusion of desire, visited her heart like a sweet alien note. Time's message of brief light was not for her. In her there was the anguish of the gods.